I'm Erin Estelle, and I'm the marketing director for the 99 Cents Only stores.
Thanks, Erin.
Hi, I'm Amit. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for 1-800-Flowers.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Moore. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Victra.
Great. Well, thank you guys for joining me to talk about our research. I sort of ran through it. I would say, first of all, that it is available, and it's very detailed research that we can make available to everybody. But with that said, we had a chance to catch up and talk in advance of this about our research, and I had shared it with you guys. What's your take on what our findings are? Do you see them in your business, and how do you sort of interpret any of this through a practical lens?
So I think you are absolutely correct when you say that the low-income consumer is not digital, so that the price-based retailers are not digital. I think that's absolutely correct when it comes to the transactions. So no, we don't have e-commerce, and that's not the way our customers like to interact with us. That's not the way, these hot deals that are here today, gone tomorrow, lend itself to get to the customer. So I think you're absolutely right with that, but you mentioned something in the report about more discretionary income going to handheld devices. And that's our customer as well as a high-income customer. So we absolutely are digital when it comes to messaging and reaching them with our creative message.
Yeah, one of the pieces that you're referencing, we then took the available discretionary income and we said over the last 10 years, there's new demands on that income, namely data plans and digital devices. So not only did we paint a picture of a consumer that's really squeezed, but their discretionary income is squeezed even further.
Right.
Yeah.
I think in our business, we see sort of some of the currents that you had mentioned in terms of the bifurcation of the market. But I think the general thesis that you're trying to present holds that I think retail is going definitely through a transformation, not just in how people are consuming, but how it is understood by all of us marketers in the room. I think for too long there has been sort of this arms race to get more data, to get more digitized, et cetera, to have all these slogans around understanding the customer journey. But if you really map out from like the medieval bazaars to where we stand now, I think we have just kind of started understanding the fragmentation in the market and the different signals that customers send that we then try to make sense out of it, right? So I think this has to do more or as much with sort of our understanding of what the retail landscape looks like versus sort of just the customers evolving to this fragmented sense of consumption around us. So we see, and I'm a big optimist both of sort of the Main Street retail store and online retail. So I think, we are still in day zero of that transformation that is going on, and very excited in terms of what it holds as sort of the customers give us more and more signals and we understand them.
Yeah, Victra, for those of you who don't know, we're Verizon's largest retailer in the U.S., and so the impact of the data point around 3.6% of lower income, discretionary income, is going to a handheld device in the data plan is very significant for us. We have to, it really made us take a step back and think about how are we approaching, first of all, that consumer that's walking in the door. How are we thinking about the way in which we serve? So the products that we're offering, the services that we offer as part of that, because I think what goes hand in glove with that is if this is such a big part of their purchase decision, you have to get it right, and you have to do it well. Otherwise, you'll probably lose them forever. I think the other thing that's interesting too in our industry right now is with the advent of unlimited across all the carrier networks, we've seen the cycle for upgrades lengthen pretty significantly from 24 months when everybody was on contracts to now 36 months. And so part of the insights that you provided really help us start to hone in on what are the triggers and what are the things that we need to consider to shorten that cycle. And how do we offer that up in a way that shows up as value and also shows up as a significant upgrade.
As I get the opportunity to go speak with various retail executives about our findings, I had one executive bring up an interesting point that I hadn't thought about, which was we have to view the associate through the lens of what we presented. Because a lot of the pressures that we talk about on the low and middle income consumers, the associates are smack in the middle of that. As you read it, or do you have any reactions about sort of how to think about the associates in the context of this?
I think for us, our associates are absolutely our customer. And so a lot of times listening to them, their friends and family come to shop at the store. They're as much of a marketing tool for us as our other customers or our paid media. And so they absolutely are our customer. And so really having a line of communication with them, getting to know our managers one-to-one has been really helpful for us.
You guys have any perspective from of the associates and what pressures they're under?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have the same situation. We have the majority of our associates, especially our new hires that we bring in, are between 19 and 24 years old. Oftentimes, they're at a place in their life where they're subprime, so they haven't established. In fact, even with the practices that they use today, most of them aren't using a bank. They're using Venmo and everything else. So being able to qualify for a device, being able to actually go through that process can be really painful. So making sure that the way we serve our associates, not only from a training practice point of view, but also how we serve them as a customer is really important. If I want them as a raving fan, as an evangelist, they have to feel like we are actually in the game and we're serving them.
Yeah, one of the executives I was speaking with said, we have a I mean, he was passionate about the information we were presenting, and he said, we have a responsibility to our customers to understand what pressures they're really under, and to our associates, and make sure that we're serving them, and for me, it was such a passionate response about the responsibility of the retailer to serve the consumer who's going through, the sort of pressures that they're going through. So for me, that was it was an angle that we didn't take in the report, but it was something that's sort of uncovered since then. Now, one of the things that we talk about in the report, by the way, we talk a lot about research because there's a lot of moving parts, and what we never try and do is claim this is the only moving part that matters, because we certainly know there's trends around digital. Last year I was here presenting our report on fragmentation in the market. We know that's occurring. But one of the things I was talking about in the research is this brick and mortar versus online battle. Because what I took was a lens that said, income matters. Let's look at the problem through an income lens. But we also know that there is something going on with brick and mortar and digital. Outside of this income lens, how else do you guys think about your customers, and how are you adapting in ways maybe that we didn't look at in the research report?
So for us, I think that the brick and mortar digital, like Amazon, the big monster Amazon, they don't really affect our business. And that's because we are not a single price point retailer, but we sell things for so low that not even Amazon can compete with that. Not even Amazon can compete with the surprise and delight that we provide for our customers. And so to provide someone who is barely making it and would never be able to afford a $80 Star Wars toy for their kids for Christmas, but they can come to us and get it for $9.99. Maybe if they get there fast enough. And so we have, I think, a unique value proposition where, digital doesn't really lend itself, e-commerce doesn't lend itself to that, I gotta have it now, I have to go see if it's real, sort of that tangible excitement that we're able to provide for our customers.
Let me add on to that question, because your business, 99 Cent Stores, is in a really unique position vis-a-vis our research. The strength that we saw in the market, are you guys seeing that sort of strength? And would you look at those results and say, yeah, that's us?
Yes, well, absolutely.
Yeah, that's good news.
So yes, right now we are doing really well, and we have been for some years. I think we suffered a little bit of losses a couple years ago, but those were mostly self-inflicted wounds, because I strongly believe that in good times, people want a deal, in bad times, people need a deal. So for us, we kind of are able to sustain, the test of time when it comes to different and changing, customer needs and things. Yeah. So we have been doing really well lately.
So sure. I love thinking about things like this in the context of history, and go, okay, today we have, all of us consultants and vendors, we're all talking about the future of retail. We put the future of in front of any future of supply chain, future of the store, but we're talking about the future of retail. But if I went back 20 years and I thought about it and said, what would we have said, us pundits and consultants, about how retail would unfold? And would we have identified, and I know we wouldn't have, would we have identified this massive trend that occurred around off-price and low price and dollar stores, sort of taking off? And if the answer is no, then it causes us to be really skeptical of even the research report we just published. Now, we don't predict the future in this, we're sort of looking at the past, but it just causes us all to sort of be reflective about anything we're hearing today and go, do we really believe that whatever I'm hearing today will be predictive of where the future is going to go? Because there's been massive opportunity that existed while everybody thought the world was going digital. There was this whole huge growth opportunity that wasn't digital at all, right?
So I can't speak for 20 years ago because I think I was like, I think I might have been 10,
all right,
but
all right.
I was still alive. But I think when you talk about the future of anything, you have to put the customer after that. And so I know there's a lot of generalization when it comes to millennials and avocado toast and all of that. But I think one thing that holds true for millennials is that they do care about experiences. And for us, a deal is an experience.
Yep, sure.
It's a feeling when you get that great deal. And they don't care as much as their parents did about like, oh, I have to go shop at the dollar store. That's because they had to, or they were embarrassed to, or it wasn't a source of pride for them.
Yeah.
And I think now, at least with our stores and the kind of offering we have, it's definitely something that people are proud of.
Yeah.
We don't have any problem getting influencers or loyal fan base to go and talk about us to their friends and family. So I think that's just kind of how the generations have evolved over time. And so like the future of the customer, I don't know if you could have predicted that, but if you follow that wave, then that's where it went.
Yeah, okay. That's an interesting point, because I call this out. The number of presentations I've seen on the store of the future or the supply chain of the future, very few people use the words you just used, which I think are profound, which is the customer of the future.
Right.
And recognizing that the customer of the future will be under whatever pressures that they are under as dictated by the environment that they are, and some of that may be economic pressure. All right, so what about either of you relative to how to think about the business? I used economics as a lens. Is that the right lens, or do you have other lens by which you think about the change that's occurring?
I think, just going back a little bit to what you were saying, I think we might be sort of conflating that there is a distinct difference between online and offline, et cetera. I think the same way 20 years ago, sort of marketers were either sort of creative or you're a data guy. I think now creativity and sort of data is everyone's business. So I think even though I sit on a predominantly online book of business, I think we think a lot about offline because our fulfillment partners are all offline. But even more than that, the way I think about it is that it's a continuum, because I could be completely online but still have offline acquisition tactics. I still might desire the offline customer. So I think sometimes we as marketers, when we take a step back, we want the world broken up into sort of, very clear boxes of saying, offline is my business, online is my colleague's business, et cetera, right? And I think then you have this organizational muscle memory that builds up, which is also very siloed, right? So, and then you have obviously sort of talent issues. You have the kind of sort of speed to outcome issues. Often I hear my CMO peer who sort of run offline stores, speed to outcome is very difficult for them to match up with online. But the point is that, we were talking about associates. The way associates get trained now, there is very little difference between online and offline mediums, right? So I think we need to evolve beyond this sort of very store-centric or online-centric mindset and really ask, like, are we learning enough collectively? Because I think if you look at 20 years ago, I would have predicted that either you learn pretty quickly or you'll be out-evolved in learning. So if you look at the Amazon bandwagon or any one of the retail disruptions in the last 20 years, and certainly we started with a small store in Queens almost 40 years ago, and we have seen the different waves. Our company name is still a 1-800 number, right? So we have gone through those disruptions and disrupted ourselves. But I think the bet that I have going out 20 years down the road is that we have to commit to learning. And we have to commit to learning at an organizational level, at a team level, at a personal level, in order to overcome sort of this bifurcation and the silos that we have almost let sort of precipitate within us as retailers.
Yeah, if you think about our research, what we really say is the consumer is changing. They're under a set of pressures. And if you look over 10 years, it becomes clear how they've voted, and how they've sort of migrated based on those pressures. But to your point about a learning organization, if we as retailers really were in sync with the consumer, if we really knew what pressures they were under and what mattered to them, then over time we would have moved to where the consumer needed us to be. One of the biggest questions I get from time to time is, well, if you're in the middle, what happens? Are you just stuck? And the answer is, no, you're never stuck. You're never stuck. The idea is understand the consumer and go to them. Bring them the offerings that matter to them. Bring them the value or the experiences that
But I think where we have tripped up is, it is exceedingly difficult to move from saying, of course, everyone in the room agrees we have to know the customer, right? To bridge that gap from knowing to doing is an incredibly difficult thing.
Sure.
I would say, and I would be specimen A of that. If you were to honestly give ourselves a report card, I think it would be like, B minus C,
Yep.
right? We have talked a long time about the omni-channel customer, omni understanding of the customer. I have omni offerings to this omnipresent customer. But at the end of the day, you look at it, we still squawk the same game. We kind of still channelize our mindset. We kind of still touch our customers in a very fragmented outcome. So I think even before we do a reconciliation or reckoning of the environment, I think we need to take a very long, hard look at sort of what have been our attempts in terms of understanding the customer. Because objectively, customers are giving out greater signals than I used to imagine we would be collecting 10 or 20 years ago, right? It's an incredible amount of information. I think the trouble now that we are having is the signal to noise ratio has gotten very vexing, right? Everything is a signal unless it doesn't become like a signal, right? And you think everything is noise unless the noise really, you see someone else making bang from the noise and you're like, holy crap, I should have listened to that noise, right? So I think we need to move past sort of these dictums that we have that, just by understanding the customer better, just by competing in terms of something that Amazon is doing a little bit better, we'll get to the home stretch. I think this is a little bit more deeper in terms of how we reconcile our own thinking, our own testing, and then ultimately learning alongside our customers versus knowing everything about them.
Creating a learning and evolving organization.
Yes.
Right? Which is certainly not an easy thing to do for most retailers.
Absolutely.
Michael, what's your view on sort of how you would view the pressures on the marketplace?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've tried to do is really take a step back and think about innovation in a different way. And it starts with not only understanding our guest, but we've really spent a tremendous amount of time recently understanding the journey. What are the different journeys that they're on? And we've done a lot of work through ethnographies and through in-store observations, and then spending a ton of time with our sales team, really watching them perform. And we've got a tremendous amount of data now that helps funnel in 5 very specific journeys that we've identified that our guest is on. So it's taking the insights of their behavior, their income, all the external forces that are factoring into it, and then boiling it into a very specific set of journeys that we're now training and developing our people inside those journeys. So if you're going to come in and have an experience with us, either digitally or in the brick and mortar experience, we want to make sure that we're talking to you in a way that's relevant to why you're there. And oftentimes what we would move to, and sort of the pattern that's always existed in this industry since before I came in, is it was about slinging phones and talking the network. And it's more than that. It's, the guest is looking for some very specific things. Sometimes it might be as simple as, I'm here for a service, I want to pay my bill, or my phone's not working. So the way in which we respond and interact changes our ability to reframe, or enables us to reframe value. And I think that's part of the magic, right? Is whether I engage online and I find a phone that I love and the features make sense, and I take it all the way to a point that still isn't very typical in our industry, where I buy that device.
Yep.
I still have to come in the store and activate it, go through the feature settings, spend that time in a way that helps me become an expert with the device that I just bought.
Got it. So we did some additional research around, you brought up the word service. There's a lot of, another thing that you'll hear often, which is, oh, consumers are buying less products and they're buying more services now, right? We've heard that. When we dug into the data, what we found is the high income consumer is buying more services because they've got more money to spare. Whereas the low and the middle income consumer, if you take out transportation, let's take out Uber out of the equation just for a minute, what you actually discover is the low and middle income consumer are not buying more services or experiences than they are product. Which there's something interesting buried in there, because I want to ask you a question about this, but the interesting part buried in there is the asset ownership of low and middle income consumers is actually plummeting. Now, part of that you could go, well, I don't need a car anymore. On the other hand, though, a lot of what we talk about driving people's net worth over time is actually appreciation on asset ownership. So there's an interesting thing when you begin to look at how this plays out over time. The lower income, middle income are less likely to own stock, they're less likely to own a home, they're less likely to own a car, so they're owning less assets. But anyway, so I put those two ideas together because there is an element that says, I'm buying less stuff, I'm buying more services, but some of that stuff we're buying are actually appreciating assets. So let me ask you the question whether or not you see that, because I can see that in the data, but what I want to know is, do you see that in your own business? And I'm not sure, Erin, if you guys, I'm not familiar enough to know if you offer services.
So no, and that is something that we're looking to get into with business development is more, can they pay their bills there?
Okay.
Even with the DMV, DMV has kiosks where you can go and get your license and registration renewed and things like that. That's more for convenience, for our customer. But I don't know how many of you live in California, but it's really expensive, much like New York. And not only is it really expensive, but the housing market there is just out of control right now. And affordable housing is really hard to find. And for some of our customers, it's a daily struggle to know, like, am I going to be able to live here next month? Am I going to be able to feed my kids this week through the rest of this week? And so for us, when you talk about stocks and appreciating assets and things like that, for them it just seems like such a faraway dream for them to get to that point. And so we're trying to meet them where they are, and like I said, provide their everyday necessities, but then that surprise and delight sort of thing that they wouldn't otherwise be able to afford. We want to respect them in that way, where we're giving them these items where maybe you don't need them, but your kids probably deserve them, and then also help you through your everyday life. So.
We offer
services?
I think we offer a very simple service. We keep men out of trouble, women happy, sending flowers.
But thank you, by the way.
We have a little bit of a secondary challenge. I call it sort of retail plus challenge, that we have to convince a sender who is not going to be the consumer of the goods to shell out across income and demo groups something for the recipient. So we spend a fair bit of time sort of thinking about our platform more as a service that's helping customers sort of help them express themselves. So whether it's something related to birthday, which is our most sort of common occasion, or sympathy on the other side, right? So those are everyday occasions. Those are our sort of the centerpieces of our company. And then we obviously have spikes like Mother's Day that is coming up in a couple of weeks, or Valentine's Day, etc. But I think there's a lot of again misunderstanding in the market when we refer to that the millennials or the younger demo likes experiences. I think pretty much every consumer wants an experience. The question is, how do they value that experience? So with a lot of our demo, what we see is that the older demo, they are putting a premium on not just something being of the right value, but what is the perceptual value of that? That did you get, it's the funeral is the day of, did you manage to get the flowers there on time so that the recipients felt that you were present, you were timely in your expression, right? So I think, and then, the same way we have sort of the millennial demo, expressing themselves by trying to find something which is Instagrammable, has a high perceptual social value in that. So I always encourage all marketers to think about, when you're thinking about service, it's not just the consumption element of the service, who's consuming the service, but who's setting the perceptual value of that service.
Yep.
And sometimes your ability to get the second degree, third degree payoff from that campaign is really aligning this perceptual with who's consuming as an outcome. So for example, our company's motto is that we make it easy to send smiles, right? So you are offering that as a service in which the consumption outcome is a third-party outcome in delivering that. So I think it's very important to think about sort of both those constructs, and that's the challenge that we face.
You used the word fragmentation earlier, because part of what we're seeing in the market as a response to this is actually a fragmentation of the value proposition. Sort of recognizing that I've got consumers that have faced different pressures, so let me develop the right value proposition. And probably the easiest way, you can look up, there's a lot of examples of this, but if you look at some of the department stores that have also started their off-price versions, you look at some of the big mass retailers who made acquisitions that maybe aren't perfect, aligned with their brand, sort of interesting. But I had two conversations recently I found fascinating, because I spent all my time in retail, and I went and talked to a professional football team. And the professional football team was telling me about how they are struggling to sell, I'll call it the cheap tickets, right? And in fact, you can watch them on TV and you see a lot of the cheap seats are unfilled. Yet last year, this particular professional football team made more money than they had ever made. And the way they made it was by selling these suite packages, these high-end, $1,000 sort of go in the locker room kind of after the game kind of packages. So it was interesting just to think about how they're bifurcating their own value proposition, recognizing that we've got this asset we need to sell to different organizations. And just a second conversation was with a motorcycle manufacturing firm. And they sell to, let's call it the leather riders, of their main bikes, but they also offer up other kinds of bikes, like a tricycle kind of bike, to an older, affluent, sort of population. And they were speaking of the same pressures about where they're feeling weakness and where they're feeling strength. So it's sort of interesting to just take the same idea and apply it across different areas and different sectors. We think the same thing may be occurring in sort of the fast food sort of sector as well. So it's sort of interesting to think about it through the lens of services, different customers, different products. So does this idea about bifurcating the value proposition, does that resonate? Are any of you guys doing anything along those lines, or could you imagine how you might?
Well, for us, I know that when you talk about the value proposition and kind of separating that out, it doesn't apply totally to us, but if you think about our merchandising mix and some of the areas that we're trying to go bigger in and go smaller into others, it's really just a response to what the customer is telling us they want. Okay. And so if that happens to kind of, segment out general merchandise from, our fresh offering, then that's just kind of naturally what happens. But for us, we don't really see that too much in our business because it is consumable and kind of everyday things that people are coming in for.
Yeah, interesting.
I like the idea of it, but the only caution I have is, I always get this before any Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, or any of the occasions, like, I wish I could get the 100K customer who has enormous discretionary spend, whose life is just great, but that's a universe of one. And that only exists on Facebook profile. If you look at the reality, it doesn't exist. Right. So I always feel like our business should be to try to understand and provide sort of a value proposition across the spectrum of the addressable customer. Because if we start thinking about sort of the middle class as the lost middle layer, you're really talking about very little targets to go after. And by the way, if you think about the loaded cost of going after everyone who belongs in the right demo, you are talking of, it's like us, when we have to compete the day before Valentine's Day on Google search between someone, if they are looking for a Valentine's gift, I have to compete with BMW. And I'm like, you probably are not the right demo if you're looking for a BMW from a search.
I just bought my wife some flowers, and there was an add-on. I could get the flowers I could add on. You should have had
the BMW as an add-on.
Right?
That's the customer I want.
Yeah. I think that's the customer my wife probably wants me to be too. So,
so you didn't buy her a BMW?
I got some flowers. Yes. Let's go there. All right. So, Michael, any idea about this bifurcation? Does that resonate at all with you?
It does. I think it's showing up in a couple of areas that we're poking at that we hadn't really played in before. One area, as the businesses move to device payment plans, oftentimes we're having some of our guests come in that either don't qualify through the financing option to achieve device payment, or that can't afford the down payment. And so we've never offered an alternative leasing program that would enable them to get in, keep the risk low for them, certainly keep the risk low for us as we think about the partnership opportunity, but serve a population that's walking out the door today that really should be in the game. I mean, they absolutely should be. Oftentimes, there was a really interesting statistic that we looked at through one of our partners that we're considering for this leasing option long term, and what percentage of the younger millennial population shows up as subprime. And it's, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's actually quite high. And it's not that they don't have the ability. They absolutely do. It's just the way they manage their money differently is also starting to impact the way in which they can qualify for certain things. So offering a service opportunity through that insight is opening up a new business model for us.
Yeah, and you highlight the point, and this I just keep pushing on my own team about this. We sit around and we imagine a millennial, right? That is a higher income millennial. And this is maybe not everybody. Maybe this is my team sitting around, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is, when you look at some of the data, and we've got some recent research on this, some of the data says that the millennial population is actually worse off, disproportionate to earlier generations in terms of how much loans they have, what their income levels are, their home ownership, things like that.
Yeah, and I think another insight is, we say that we tend to generalize generations. Inside any generation, there is a series of life stages that you go through. So think about the set of millennials and the differences that you have from older to younger and where they are in the life spectrum and what's happening in their lives. And so just to ignore that, I think, or lump them all into one big bucket, as you're pushing on as well, is absolutely the wrong thing to do. You have to pay attention.
Okay. Well, there are two other things I'll just add, because we're getting to the end of our time here, just to think about, and I encourage you guys to think about this, because I'm, as we went through the research, we're sort of passionate about thinking about these. The first thing is you can't, and I don't mean to get political, but you can't look at the data without thinking about the political situation and understanding the relationship. So however you interpret that, you've got to sort of think about that. And then the second thing is, now that the administration has passed some tax reform, the question is, how will that affect? And if you play that out over time, is that going to solve the issues that I highlighted, or is that going to accelerate? Because if you take that into account, that allows you to set your own strategy about whether or not you believe the trends that we've seen over the last 10 years will continue, or whether those will begin to change.
Do you mean that from a consumer perspective of I'm getting more money back in my paycheck, or do you mean that from a corporate perspective as we're getting some tax break?
So my intention of the statement was more about the consumer and about whether or not the income discrepancy that we sort of showed, whether or not that continues, whether or not it abates, or whether or not it accelerates.
So for us, I think if they are getting more in their paychecks and they want to shop more with us, great. If they're getting less and now they have to shop more with us, great. So I think for us, it works out either way for us. So.
Well, hopefully that'll play out for all of our retailers.
And I mean no pun, but I think the situation is like a Russian doll, right? Like you have layers of the Russian doll. So I think, maybe the consumers will get a little bit more layered with the tax dollars back in, but I don't think it is of any material outcome in terms of sort of the discretionary spend that, I'm anticipating that there'll be a huge bump up in the retail outcomes.
Well, there was an article just today on CNBC that there's a $1 trillion worth, or an estimated $1 trillion worth of buybacks in stocks coming. So you sort of equate that to the numbers I mentioned before about who owns the stocks, and take that for whatever it's worth. So with that, we're out of time. And again, I didn't mean to open up a political can of worms. We can certainly do that over a drink as we move to cocktail hour next. But they're interesting thoughts for us all to think about. Absolutely. So thank you guys very much for joining me up here. And thank you guys for having us.